Welcome, welcome, welcome. So great to see you all. Thank you so much for tuning in for our biannual Signals from the Future presentation from the one and the only Melissa Clark-Reynolds. A few tiny bits of housekeeping. First of all, ke te mea hoki hokainga o tēnei rohe arako ngai tu ahuriri na mihi nui. So greetings to mana whenua of this spot that I am broadcasting to you from. That is nai tu ahuriri. My name is Kyla Colbin. I'm the founder and chief executive of BOMA. We run these sessions twice a year. Well, we host Melissa, who runs these sessions twice a year. It is always a fun hour. It is always thought-provoking. It is always intriguing. It always goes someplace that we weren't expecting. Couple of tiny bits of housekeeping. First of all, we will have time for a Q&A at the end. With your questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. So there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A function. We're in about a few minutes time. We're going to be turning off the chat function just to keep things reasonably straightforward for us. So bring on your questions. We will have time for them at the end. Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Like I said, the chat, we will turn that off. Kia ora, Jen, good to see you. Kia ora, Claire, good to see you. All right, sorry, I'm just seeing all my buddies here on this call. Once Melissa gets going and she shares her slides, just so you know, you can slide the line in between her and the slides back and forth, so you can see her beautiful face a little bit more vividly while you see the slides alongside as well. I recommend making her as big as possible so you can see her, and then you can see the slides as well. We are recording this presentation. We will share the recording after. All right, without further ado, my favorite futurist, one of Aotearoa New Zealand, sorry, I know there are futurists on the call. One of my favorite futurists, one of Aotearoa New Zealand's foremost futurists, independent director, executive strategist, too many talents to be able to name. And also, I'm so privileged to say, dear friend of mine, Melissa Clark-Reynolds, ONZM. Kia ora, Melissa, welcome. Hi to my, so good to see you.
Oh, look, I'm so excited. I know we were talking earlier. This has been a redo. I feel like the world really genuinely is just like I've got whiplash. I've got signals whiplash.
Can I just say, I don't envy you. Like, I think about if I had to choose 10 things to share, I would just be completely overwhelmed by it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being here. Have fun.
Absolute pleasure. So thank you. Hi to everybody. Hi to my London friends. Smina, nice to see you. Tony, just calling out a few people, but really lovely to have this community together, and Ben and all of my Hamilton Chat friends. So this idea of why do we even think about signals is really a lot of it is to feed into strategic foresight. And we are constantly making decisions under conditions of uncertainty. And the older I get, the less I know, the less certain I feel about anything. And I really feel like that certainty is, it's like kryptonite. So what we're going to play with today is 10 signals, but I had to throw in a bonus one because I needed cheering up a little. 10 signals that I'm paying attention to right now, or certainly since we did the last event. And a signal is this idea of maybe a small or a weird thing. I often think about them being almost like the breadcrumbs in Hansel and Gretel, that you can follow them and wonder where they might go. And I've been doing this now for 10 years, and in that 10 years, I've found signals that turned out to be complete dead ends, or signals that have blown up in ways I didn't expect. And so I'm hoping that the 10 things that I picked today will help you to think about the future in a different way, or maybe just make you wonder about possibility. So as I said, I feel like certainty is kryptonite, possibility is a superpower. So the first one is, I seem to be hearing just so much about robotics at the moment. And you may or may not know that Amazon recently deployed its millionth industrial robot. That's a lot of robots. And I understand that Amazon owns over half of the industrial robots in the United States, which is a pretty amazing statistic. And when we think about that, we often think about robots looking a bit like this. We think about them being humanoid, or we've all seen those cool videos of dog-like robots. but most industrial robots look a bit more like a vacuum cleaner iRobot type robot. If we think about what Amazon is doing, they're using those robots for warehouse management, for picking and packing, for maintenance, for moving pallets around. And a lot of the robots that are out there don't look humanoid in any way. They might be running a conveyor belt or adding ingredients into a recipe. But I've been watching this Neo robot for a while, uh, partly because it is humanoid, and partly because, other than the little iRobot or robo vacuums, they are really marketing this as a domestic robot. And they market that it can teach itself to do any task a human can do. It turns out that they're actually operated by these guys, and they all pretty much seem to be guys with VR headsets. So when you ask it to do a task in your house, like the ironing, some techno boy is actually mimicking the ironing with a gaming headset on. And I think this is kind of interesting. We've had a lot of discussions lately about privacy, about whether my home should have cameras in it, how that operates. And I don't know that people are ready to have kind of techie boys running their household tasks and looking into family homes through these headsets. Now, you can geo-zone, so you can go in and go, I don't want that boy in my bedroom, or I don't want them in my bathroom. But of course, it then means that you've bought an industrial robot that's supposed to help clean and do tasks, but it can't go and actually clean your bathroom or clean your bedroom or make the bed or whatever it is that actually might be useful. Uh, the other side of it is I've been wondering a lot about modern slavery legislation. Don't know what's so modern about it, but slavery legislation that's being introduced around the world. And I start to wonder if these workers move from being these kind of tech boys to being low paid piecework, just as we've seen in the AI revolution. We've seen the taggers be paid tiny amounts of money an hour to do tasks for the big tech companies. Will we start to see these workers in the Philippines and Nepal and Kenya and other English speaking locations now start to do piecework as they work from home, cleaning and tidying my house? So I'm just very curious about this. I'm watching where it goes, and yeah, I'm interested to see what you think. You know, would you have one of these in your homes if you knew it was being run by a 20-year-old tech bro? Thinking of computer games, I came across this game recently, and it really brought together a bunch of signals that I've been thinking about. You may know Carla and I work together on a computer gaming platform, and I've spent quite a bit of my career either playing games or making games. What I like about this one is that it's a game in which the players take back looted artifacts from major museums. And it feels like this is a part of the zeitgeist at the moment. You know, in British museums, there are big collections of human remains. Of course, those human remains belong to people that they were generally colonized by the UK. So Egyptian remains, many of in New Zealand, there are the Mokai, the heads that have been returned by a number of museums around the world. But we see that Western museums who think that it's okay to display important artifacts that were often stolen, or body parts, or sarcophagi and so on that contain body parts, that if it was their own people, they may not consider that appropriate or culturally appropriate. So I really like this game. It could do with a little bit better gameplay, but what I like most about this game is the narrative inside it, that I can be an African going out and reclaiming my lost heritage from Western museums. And so it's a hunting game. You have to find it. There's some puzzles, and then you have to escape with the artifact and get it back to your home country. I think it really hits one of the zeitgeists at the moment. speaking of zeitgeists, then is this, which I think is super interesting. And here, what we see is in New Zealand, Indigenous people setting a trespass notice against mining company that they don't want on traditional land. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like this. We see protests around the world, and you can think about what we've seen in the US with pipelines. But here, this is the first case I know of where Indigenous people have set a trespass notice in relation to deep sea mining. And when I first pulled this signal out, we weren't currently in the war with Iran, or the US wasn't at war with Iran. There's been a lot of debate around future energy, around whether we should be looking for new sources of gas and oil. And again, I feel like the energy conversation is the signal at the moment, as well as Indigenous people standing for their, what we call in New Zealand, their mana whenua, their right to look after and care for that land, including that seabed. And so this is a coming together of a couple of signals here of the rise of the Indigenous, which I've talked about for quite some time as a big driver of change. And then we see also the exploration and exploitation of oil, gas, and minerals. I think this is a major signal. Kind of pivoting a bit because I can't not talk about AI. This comes from Section. I don't have any financial relationship with them, but I think they're fantastic. And I'm a big fan of Pivot, which is Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway's podcast. Scott Galloway was one of the founders of Section, and they provide really great AI training. And went to their marketing summit recently, and this slide came up, and I thought it was super interesting, which was, how are people actually using AI? And here was about marketers, but 72% of marketers were basically using it as a fancy search. And so we see that the people are using ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude as a search tool, as well as using the AI mode in Google. And then the next big thing is that they're using it to edit copy. Uh, I think this just feels like such a waste. It's kind of, there are so many fantastic things we could be doing with AI, and we will talk about a couple of those today. But so interesting to me that the number one use case is search. And I did, in a previous one of these, talk about whether or not Google was in trouble. I did think Google was in trouble, but now that I see what they've done with the Google AI search, I'm less worried about that. And here, what we need to be thinking about as marketers is how do people find us? So I've been working a lot with companies lately on the difference between the old SEO and AEO. How do we think about search in a AI related world? And if you go back to my last webinar, talked a bit there about where did search go, what are the websites that AI search is using. I think the other thing that's really coming up in AI search is the rise of advertising as a business model for those search engines. And so I'm going to talk about ChatGPT in a minute, but the rise of advertising within ChatGPT has really struck me as another signal of a business model change. And for those of you who know, I'm a big fan of Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen says there are no disruptive technologies, there are only disruptive business models. And what I would say with AI is that AI has been able to, this LLM form of AI has been able to rise now because of big changes in business models, how cheap energy has become, the sheer volume of information on the internet, and then this idea that you either have a subscription to an AI service or advertising within that AI, trying to get you to buy things through that, or finally, when the product's free, you're the product. And so the sale of your data to third parties, and I'm going to come back to that. I've been playing around with Cursor a lot lately. Every month, somebody says to me, what are the tools that you're using? So I have found this particularly interesting. The rise of Cursor has been phenomenal. Cursor is an AI coding tool, And, we see the rise of vibe coding, we see the rise of changes to coding. World Economic Forum data on job changes thanks to AI shows major disruption to coders. And there's some discussion that maybe 20% of the world's coders have lost their jobs in the last 18 months. And a big pile of that has been because of the productivity that these tools like Cursor enable. And so here, while the World Economic Forum has shown quite a lot of jobs, 90 something million jobs have been lost thanks to AI. Interestingly, it also shows that 170 million new jobs have been created thanks to AI. And what we've seen is every time there's been a new technology, we've seen the loss of some jobs, but the creation of new jobs. And almost always the creation of those new jobs has been at a higher skill level and a higher income level for the workers than the jobs that were lost. But it's not one for one. It's not like a displaced worker gets the high level job. Those displaced workers, unless they retrain, find themselves kind of having fallen out of that economy. And maybe we could talk about that a bit in the discussion later. When we think about jobs, then what I hadn't anticipated was that one of the fastest growing jobs around the world would be for electricians. And we've had a number of discussions around the growth of data centers, around how energy hungry data centers are. But I hadn't really thought about it until I started digging into the jobs data, that what we would be hunting for so much would be both electrical engineering and straight out electricians. And so, if somebody is asking me at the moment, what could my kid do that doesn't, take them forever to learn to train to be, and that there is a boom of jobs. Being a tradie is definitely one of them, but electricians in particular, there is a worldwide shortage thanks to this AI boom, which is probably not one of the things that I had predicted even 6 months ago. This is another one I hadn't really predicted 6 months ago, but has actually been around since January, which is that OpenAI, through its execs, has now become one of the biggest donors to Trump. And here we see this $25 million gift to the Trump campaign, to Republicans. And if we take a bit of a timeline, many of you will have been watching what's going on with Anthropic and ChatGPT, and you will have seen the big dump GPT movement that's been going on just in the last few weeks. I've been back and looked at this timeline, and OpenAI has been positioning itself to take the government contracts in the US off Anthropic for some time. And so here, I want you to hold this thought, because I am going to go and talk about what's going on with Anthropic and it being a supply chain risk in the US. But I think that this moment, when I saw this signal, I really started to wonder what was being put into play, because this wasn't a signal I was expecting. Now, we have seen a real tightness between the tech bros and this regime in the US. And in particular, I think about the work that Jacinda Ardern has been doing globally around the regulation of social media, around the regulation of AI. And what we've seen is a real coziness between the tech industry and the Republicans in the US, trying to work quite hard against regulation of AI, working against regulation of the industry. And so when I saw this signal, it just made me very, very curious about what might play out next. So an intervening signal is this one, which is just how much shipping is being disrupted through the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. I was at an event yesterday for PGG Wrightson, and they assured me that New Zealand has enough fertilizer for a year already in the country. So this is going to disrupt farming around the world through so much of the fertilizer that is used and the petrochemicals that are used on farm come from the production of natural gas in particular. We see that we've already had major disruptions in the Suez Canal, and we've had a lot of disruption the last few years in the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal is straight out climate change. It's a freshwater system, which I hadn't understood till a few years ago. With climate change, there is less rain falling around the canal, and the canal is becoming quite shallow in the summer months. So we haven't quite hit the northern summer yet. But what it does is it has massively restricted the number of vessels being able to either take New Zealand exports or other exports through that canal. And then we've had the disruption with Suez, with the war in the Middle East, the previous wars in the Middle East, and also piracy. And then now we see the Strait of Hormuz being disrupted as well. So you can see there 30% of seaborne oil trade goes through the strait, and 20% of the global liquid natural gas goes through the strait as well. Now, that makes me sound quite insensitive to what is actually going on. War is never good for human beings. We see mass displacement of people. We're seeing, again, the destruction of human life. So I just do want to take a moment and acknowledge that there are a lot of conflicts going on around the world. I have friends who live in this region, and I have friends in the Ukraine. And war is never the answer as far as I'm concerned. But on top of that, the whole world is not immune. So the entire world is affected by these major supply chain disruptions. Coming back to transport for a second, Waymo recently put out a report where Swiss Re, which is a major insurance player, analysed over 25 million miles of Waymo traffic, and what it found was that it was 96% safer than having a human being at the wheel. And I certainly have really enjoyed my Waymo experiences. I post them on LinkedIn regularly. I like the fact that there's no cigarette smoke kind of smell from the driver. I'm not going to have to listen to dodgy talkback radio. I can play my own music through Spotify, and I actually feel much safer. I feel like the driving in a Waymo is much safer. So it's really interesting to me to see that autonomous vehicles are safer on the roads than human-driven ones. Now, this has some major implications for the way we think about city design. I think that we know that autonomy is inevitable. I've talked before about the impact of GLP-1 drugs, and I think that the 3 or 4 big technological revolutions we're going through at the moment is, one is autonomy, the second is the GLP-1 drugs, so the weight loss drugs and the impact that they're having. The third one is obviously AI. But the fourth one I'm actually going to say is vaccines. And so, we see that vaccines have made a major difference to life expectancy around the world. Not going to talk any more about them today, but autonomy is very definitely in my mind, and that can be autonomy of ships. It could be autonomy of the drones that we're seeing. We're seeing Ukrainian autonomous drones being deployed in Iran at the moment. We see autonomous planes. We're seeing autonomous cars. I have a video I'm watching over and over at the moment of autonomous trucks on the road in Texas. So autonomy is coming. I don't know that we're spending enough time thinking about the implications for cities. We know that you can fit a lot more cars and trucks if they're autonomous because they can talk to each other, they drive closer. We will need less roading in the future. We'll need less tunnels. We'll certainly need less car parking buildings. And I think we do need to be having some big debates around the future of the city and what it looks like in an autonomous driving world. Another one that I'm seeing a lot of is protein. And, we see that at the moment there seems to just be everything is labeled with protein. Every influencer seems to be peddling a protein supplement. I'm a fan of Trini Woodall's in that she has really empowered women to dress the way they like to dress, to wear the kinds of makeup they want to wear. She's very generous with supporting other influencers, and she's been very stratospheric, I think is probably the word, in building her Trinity London brand. And her videos, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook or other platforms, are well watched, and she's well loved by women around the world. But fascinatingly, it seems like everyone, whether it's Mel Robbins, whether it's Trini Woodall, like Elle Macpherson, like we just see all of these influencer women at the moment peddling protein. And I have a real problem with it. One of them is that we see more diseases in the West of the overconsumption of protein than we see of the underconsumption. It is very hard in a developed country to find people who are protein deficient. And protein can't be stored in the body, so it's either converted to carbohydrate and stacked away in fat, or it's excreted by the body. And so what we see in the West is we see this proliferation of obesity, of diabetes, of kidney disease, liver disease, heart disease. Much of it is associated with the overconsumption of protein. But at the moment, we have this big boom. I was in the US just recently, and it's like everything seems to have a protein label on it, whether it's a potato chip or whether it's a steak. It tells you in big sort of sign on the front cover that it is so many grams of protein. And I'm concerned that protein is going to be the next sugar. We're going to see that we've had this overconsumption of protein, and bang, we realize that it's causing us more problems than it's doing us good. So just really a bit bothered by this one. My last signal, and it is number 11 for those of you who've been counting, is a woman that I've been following for many years and admire deeply. She's a gardener in Ukraine. In the links that if you'll get a PDF of my signals later, and in those links, what we'll see is a link to her, and if you would like to donate to her, I do. She has a nursery, and of course, during a war, one of the last things people do is buy plants. She's one of the world's clematis or clematis, depending on your pronunciation, specialists, and she brings great beauty to her photos of her garden in Ukraine at the same time as talking about what it is to garden in a war zone. So I realized that there was something I really wanted to talk about earlier, but I just want to come back. So I'm going to go back a sec. Wanted to talk a little bit more about this signal. You may have seen that Anthropic has been declared a supply chain risk by Pete Hegseth. This is a signal that I'm really interested in. It is the first time that a US-owned company has, in a sense, been declared a danger to the state. And I don't think we can separate that from these donations from OpenAI. And so we've seen Anthropic be very concerned about the use of their tools like Claude in the war in Iran. And what they were wanting to do was to limit the use of their tools so that it couldn't be used for mass surveillance of Americans or for the deployment of autonomous weaponry. What I find interesting here is they weren't that worried about the mass surveillance of non-Americans with their tools, but they did set some guardrails around the way that they want their product to be used. Now, I heard a great phrase recently, or a sentence that said, look, a tank provider doesn't tell the US government how to deploy their tank. And Scott Galloway said, yeah, that's true, but the tank isn't deciding what to bomb. And so there's this very interesting, and I'm going to continue to watch how it plays out. Should there be guardrails around the use of AI in war? If those guardrails aren't set by government regulation, should the suppliers of that technology be the ones to decide where and how their technology can be used? And if they set those guardrails, should they be punished for it in a sense by having their product taken out of an entire government supply chain? So, just curious as to how you're thinking about this, how you see it playing out. I also think that it's a major signal that we've seen people unsubscribe from ChatGPT as a result. We've had to see apologies from ChatGPT saying we may have been a bit hasty, and the cover that they've given themselves to say, well, if it's legal, it's okay. What we've seen, of course, in the US government lately is a lot of issues around what is legal versus what might be declared by the president through decree as something that he is going to do. So I know we hear this word unprecedented times often, but we're very definitely in unprecedented times. So those are my signals. I want to hand back to you, Carla, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I knew I would have so much. I knew I'd be provoked in such robust ways. We've got a bunch of questions coming through from the Q&A, but I got the mic, so I get to, offer some comments, observations, questions myself. One of the I had comments on like pretty much every one of your signals, so I'm not going to give myself the luxury of going through all of them. I will touch on just that last one. And of course, one of the things that's super interesting now is we're seeing this conflict in Iran being labeled as really the first AI war, not in the sense that AI hasn't been used for conflict previously, but where AI is identifying targets and identifying them at a rate dramatically faster than what has historically been done. We saw that school get bombed that appears to maybe have been identified by Anthropic, by Claude. So, that they have drawn a line is a wonderful thing. And this isn't a question of good guys and bad guys. And one of the signals I'm really curious about is the signal of how we feel about the ethics of AI, and specifically what I think about when I think about that is Anthropic famously formed with the idea of making AGI safely, and then recently abandoning that pledge because they said there's no way we can if everyone else is just racing ahead. So any thoughts on that?
Look, there's a few things. One of my favorite books last year was a book called The Alignment Problem, which was a book about sort of the history of AI development. And like I wrote my first line of code for predictive analytics in the 80s, and I ran an insurance company in the 90s where we auto accepted every claim. We used what was back then called switch tech. So it was an early form of AI where we wrote like a million lines of if-then code, and that ran the insurance company. So why I mention this is that the LLM version of AI is about kind of the fifth big methodology or way of thinking about AI. And I think there's actually two things going on here. I don't know that we will get to fully agentic AI in an LLM code base. So part of me wonders if the abandonment is also actually our tech can't get there, which I'm curious about. Now, I don't know that for sure. I'm just surmising that. And I'm interested, like, just as every other form of thinking about how we do AI, whether it was Switch or whether it was neural networks or what it might be, we've come to dead ends at some point. And I can see the end of the LLMs. I'm not yet sure what will take over. Now, if I look back, I kind of wonder if we now have the computing power to commercialize the neural networks technology in a way that we couldn't 10 years ago. So, but I'm curious as to what is after LLMs as a way of thinking about AI. So that's one piece of the answer for me. And I'm fascinated, anybody in the chat, like, or you want to contact me and have this conversation, I'm super curious as to what are the new models that are emerging that are after the LLMs. And it's a bit like if we can imagine pre-Google, we can imagine post-Google. We can imagine pre-LLM, we can imagine post-LLM. The ethics one, there are so many angles to this. I've just read The Empire of AI. I cannot recommend that highly enough to people, which is really made me think a lot about modern slavery and the people who are tagging and coding. It has made me think a lot about who we put AI in the hands of. And coming back in previous of these webinars, I've talked about the AI of animal language. I'm completely fascinated by this. I have deep concerns that we are AIing ourselves, and that is not actually increasing our intelligence. But if you're a farmer, and you know that you're smarter with a dog. And so, the AI of a dog working alongside customs workers or working alongside farmers, that would actually double our intelligence. And so, on one hand, there's this piece around ethics and what is human nature and all of that discussion. But I'm starting to think about one, what's the next form of AI look like? And two, if we actually wanted to expand our intelligence using AI, would we double down on AIing ourselves?
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to get to the questions that have come in. Just before I do, a couple of bits and pieces. First of all, how awesome is Melissa? I mean, we all know this, but it deserves to be repeated. We used to run a session called Strategic Foresight for Leaders that was open to the public. What we find is that those sessions are phenomenally valuable within organizations, because what you can do is you can craft your scenarios related to the specific kinds of challenges and trajectories that you're facing in your industry for your company. And so if you are interested in bringing Melissa in for one of these sessions, sing out to us, let us know. She honestly, I know there are a bunch of folks on this call who have had you come in to run sessions like these. One of the things that happens when you run a session with Melissa is that not only do you explore scenarios that are relating to your company, but you also build the skill of doing it for yourself. And so you come away from those sessions just incredibly empowered to think about the future differently and how it might impact where you're heading and what you're wanting to do. So cannot recommend this. Working with Melissa highly enough. As y'all know, I've been working with her a long time, and she is just so much value every single time. On another note, there is an event coming up that we're not connected to, but that I'm happy to share with y'all, which is the Aotearoa Futures Forum. So if futures is something you are interested in, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. You can have a look at that. Right. Let's take a look at some of these questions, comments. All right. Somebody says that they love this for the electricians. Back in the day, we were told to be a lawyer and accountant, don't do trades. But of course, the trades are coming back, the lash and the backlash. Rachel McBride suggests we have robot electricians. So combining two of those signals, which is something I know you're big on, Melissa, we're going to take these signals and bring them together. We've got a question from Mary Fenwick, who says, how concerned are you that the major AI platforms are currently controlled by men? Mary was at an event with Carol Cadwallader last night, who coined the term broligarchy. How big of a concern is this? I heard your term techno boy. I wrote that one down.
It's a big concern for me. I think that, I don't subscribe to strong gender roles, and I do also think that we need to think differently. I was at an event with some people who are actually on this call, where we did scenarios and signals with like 90 people down in Christchurch about a week ago. And we were talking about the war in Iran and actually war in general. And one of the women in the room really piped up about, well, like a woman's point of view, we're not so enthusiastic about these wars. And I think it's an interesting one where it's not just that they're mostly men doing it, but it has become quite a gendered group of men. There's a kind of a manliness in it. This is not a group of men who are exploring what it might be if they were non-binary doing this, or, it's not a group of men who are really kind of saying, gosh, we need to be more inclusive about who's in the room with us. And so it's a bubble of a particularly gendered group of men. And it goes with the protein thing, and it goes, it used to be Soylent Green, it used to be I'm too busy to code, I'm just going to drink a smoothie. Like, I think there's a bunch of genderedness amongst the men who are designing it. And we see that there's a lot of women in the ethics of AI, and those women are continuously sidelined. Those women talk about leaving the Googles, leaving Anthropic, leaving other, the open AIs. If you go looking for it, it feels like it's women in ethics who are being sidelined and men charging forward with that oligarchy. So yes, I'm deeply concerned about it. I don't feel represented by a lot of the AI that is out there.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Natasha Lewis, who says, what do we need to do in New Zealand to be protecting government and politics to keep lobbying private tech bro funds out of New Zealand?
Oh, I think that one's bolted. I mean, I'm working with a government agency at the moment. Most government agencies have mandated Copilot. Uh, I, I'm not a big Copilot fan. I don't use ChatGPT anymore. But I would say that because Copilot is free and included in the Microsoft bundle, that's bolted. Yeah.
Yeah, not even free, right? Like a lock-in.
It's a lock-in, and it has been locked in. And I'm concerned that many government agencies think Copilot equals AI.
Mm-hmm. I do just want to touch on a thought I had when you were talking about the Strait of Hormuz and the Iran conflict, and then you talked previously about energy, the energy needs coming from AI. One of the things that occurs to me is a side benefit of skyrocketing oil prices might be greater incentive to adopt solar, to accelerate a shift that I feel like we've kind of had a little bit of, we keep talking about the lash and the backlash. We've had a little bit of a pushback on support for EVs, not a pushback on people wanting EVs, but a pushback on support for them. And this kind of thing might reinvigorate the movement towards the electrification of the economy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, I think the electrification of the economy is inevitable. And again, I think maybe in a previous one, if not, I've spoken about this before, that in the previous Trump administration, it made sense for them to subsidize coal. And the reason that I think that they subsidized coal was that, and you've put this slide up in some of your presentations in the past, almost 10 years ago now, it became cheaper to install and operate solar than to operate coal. I'll say that again. It's cheaper to install and operate solar than to operate coal. Now, this was going to have a major impact on American balance sheets. So, we look at the US in particular, just the ubiquity of fossil fuel for energy. If all those big corporates found their coal-fired dryers and processors and steam plants and energy production valued at zero on their balance sheets, it was going to do major issues to American stability and American interest rates. And so I'm not saying he was right to do it, but I totally understand the logic behind subsidizing coal. And one of the things I see as a futurist is I call it people fighting for the past. So instead of creating the future, they fight for the past. And I see that electrification and decarbonisation of all economies, including New Zealand, where we use a lot of coal in New Zealand, particularly in food processing, Fonterra, but also other food processors, it is inevitable that that will become electrified. And that electrification is going to be wind and solar. So governments can slow it down all they like, but it is inevitable.
Well, positive news indeed. We've got a question here from Mark Robinson, who says, with the spread of conflict across the globe originating from an aggressor perspective, so what I'm interpreting here is, Putin going into Ukraine, the US going into Iran and Venezuela, are you seeing any signals that China may follow others with respect to Taiwan? And how would this destabilize current balance of power globally and potential endpoints? Just a little, a softball for you from Mark here.
I'm a big fan of Ian Bremmer. If you don't subscribe to his newsletter, I thoroughly recommend it. He's an international commentator on geopolitical issues. I found that I don't always agree with his politics, but I found his insights particularly useful, and I think he's worth following. And he talks a fair bit about this. I see that there are some real possibilities for not just China and Taiwan, but other nations to destabilize the relationship between China and Taiwan. So, you know, what about if they flooded the waters around Taiwan with autonomous vessels and made it look like there was a US fleet there? What might that do? I think that Taiwan has been ripe for some time for manipulation, not just by the Chinese, but actually by other global powers. So, I can only say yes. But I don't necessarily believe that it will be China that's the instigator of this. It may be backlash. It may be China feeling that it's been slighted or that it needs to defend its borders as opposed to necessarily being expansionist.
Shifting tack here, Jade Tang Taylor asks, what keeps you hopeful for the future?
Gardening. And that's part of why I wanted to mention, gardening in a war zone. I have a dear friend in Lebanon who, there are bombs within a couple of kilometers of her house in Beirut at the moment. And I was like, babe, what can I do? And she's like, keep posting your daily pictures. And, I feel so helpless. But I think there is something about continuing to seek beauty in the world. It's part of why I love like computer games too. Like we need to have play and joy and beauty and share that with the world. Um, and there still are those moments, of hope. Like I have a dear colleague in Ukraine as well. So, the world is a smaller place than it ever used to be. Yeah, share beauty wildly.
A few years ago, my friends Angus Hervey and Tane Hunter, who at the time were working together on a thing called Future Crunch, they shared an essay that they wrote about the twisted rope of history or something like that. And the general premise was, if we hunt for things to be afraid of or to make us concerned, we will find ample evidence. And if we hunt for beauty, we will find ample evidence. And I think sometimes it can feel like looking for the beauty is naive, or like we're trying to say the war doesn't matter because there's a garden here. And really all we're doing is we're just expanding our appreciation for the fact that the world is a multifaceted and complex place. The present is contradictory and messy, and the future is too. And we can find all of those things. And when we look for beauty, it doesn't mean we're abandoning people in war zones or not caring enough or not taking it seriously enough. It means we're choosing to vote with our attention for what we think is worth investing in.
Yeah. And, I'm reminded of Rebecca Solnit, and hope. And beauty for me helps us to find hope when things feel pretty bleak. Whatever that beauty might be, it could be beauty in the laughter of a child. It could be, beauty in nature or beauty in art, beauty in music. And I think there's that, yeah, just love that, we don't find hope by practicing despair.
That's a powerful sentence right there. We don't find hope by practicing despair. We've got a question from Helen Shorthouse, who is interested in the protein conversation. You talk about the overconsumption, which is true. She's wondering if there's also a crossover with that being a function of the increasing shift to plant-based diets.
I don't know about that, but what I have been thinking a bit about is, so we see that the only thing that really drives milk consumption in adults is coffee consumption. So generally, adults don't drink milk around the world except in their coffee. What has been so interesting is over a 10-year period, there's been a steady decline of milk consumption, but at the same time, there's been a kind of equal increase in cheese consumption. And so we see that cheese feels like it's everywhere, and there's all these Instagram like channels on cheese and cheese, cheese, cheese. Now, one of the byproducts of cheese is whey, and so there's also been a real need for a market for this waste product. And I kind of see this sale of whey protein into everything. Let's put whey protein into a potato chip. Like, even it just seems crazy. It's a bit like we saw in the US when they subsidized corn, that the high fructose corn syrup suddenly started appearing in all kinds of foods that didn't need sweetening, peanut butter, and you name it. Well, I feel a bit like that around whey at the moment. I also realize that a lot of people don't understand that plant-based protein, and I'm talking about like unprocessed here, just straight out chickpeas and lentils and, all of that they are really good proteins. And we tend not to see people who eat like clean, whole food plant protein over consuming, because it also comes with fiber and it comes with water in it and a bunch of other stuff. So when I talk about the overconsumption of protein, I'm generally thinking about animal-based protein. This belief that somehow I need protein at every meal. We see menopause is having a moment, and a lot of these influencers are telling women in menopause they need to eat a lot more protein. Well, the research isn't that strong. The research shows that we really need a tiny bit, something like 30 extra grams per kilo of body weight for someone in menopause. Like, it's really not a lot. And what we know is that humans need around 100 grams, 97 to 100 grams of protein per kilo of body weight a day. And so people are consuming that in, 3 times a day at the moment in the Western world. So I'm not necessarily seeing it around plant-based protein. I am seeing a reaction against highly processed, ultra-processed plant-based protein. And we're seeing that when I go to supermarkets in the US, there's a lot less shelf space being taken up by the ultra-processed plant proteins. And I think that that will continue. I don't think it's a backlash against plant-based protein. It's a backlash against ultra-processed food.
We've got a question from Liz Yeaman. We do have time for a few more questions, so we're getting to as many of these as we can. Just as a reminder, if you want to bring Melissa into your organization, run a strategic foresight for leaders session that is targeted to your specific situation, do feel free to reach out. Those sessions are so directly valuable to an organization's strategic path forward. Cannot recommend them highly enough. Liz says autonomous electric vehicles reduce the cost for transport significantly, which has the potential to compete on cost and convenience directly with public transport. Do you think we might need more roads than ever if some kind of protection of mass transit is not achieved? And one of the things I'm interpreting from that question is, what that calls to mind for me is this concept that I only learned a couple of years ago, the idea of latent demand. And one of the first things that happens when things get cheaper is we might see actually an increase in demand, like more of it getting used. So the market grows because there's been a whole bunch of people who wanted to use private transport or taxis or whatever, but couldn't afford it. So thoughts on public transport in a world of cost-effective autonomous electric vehicles?
I think these are about the policy choices we make. We know that in places like San Francisco, Uber has disrupted public transport more than anything else. And so, if you're a regular user of the BART, which I am, I totally understand. Like, I'd rather use Uber Pool or Waymo than use the BART in the summer. Particularly if you go to like Berkeley, where my sister used to live, it smells of sweat and dope, and it's really, really hot. And so I can totally understand that if there is access to something else, public transport is what gets disrupted. I also live on the top of a mountain with some really windy roads, and the bus up here is like once an hour or something. And I can see that if my city decided to invest in autonomous transport as an option for public transport, it may be more efficient and effective in some of the places that we live. It also, for the places like Littleton or Akaroa or Governor's Bay, Neotautahi, that don't have great public transport, the ability for the city to be involved in autonomous public transport is something that I think hasn't been explored enough. And so this uncertainty thing is, yeah, maybe it will increase demand, maybe it will disrupt public transport. Maybe public transport also has to think about how it really works in these environments. Maybe we can't continue to lay new light rail. We can't continue to rip up streets and dig holes. There is some better ways of doing, like the Uber pool model applied to public transport. There's nothing to stop cities from thinking that way. So yeah, I'm not convinced. I think it's about the choices that we make and how we make them. For me, whether I own an autonomous vehicle or whether I have access to it, I think those models are coming together as well. And I talked about the subscription business model earlier. For a long time, I was a Mevo user. When I lived in London, I was a Zipcar user. I felt no need to own a car in London, but I did want access to a car. And so whether I would want to join a club like that where I subscribe to a jointly owned, fleet of autonomous vehicles, that feels a lot more likely, I think, for urban dwellers than each person going out and buying themselves an autonomous vehicle and parking it on their street. So I think we have to think about that. How do signals come together? How do the big drivers like changes in business models come together? So curious.
So interesting. I love that idea of shifting our public transport model to more of an Uber pool type model. I used to live on Rocking Horse Road in South Shore, which is a spit, which with a single road that goes top to bottom, and the number 60 bus would come by, and from about 5 o'clock, it would have maybe 3 people on this huge bus, and from about 8 o'clock, it would have maybe one person, if that. So it's just watching this bus go by empty all night, every night. There are definitely better ways to do it. And I think it needs, those policy choices, they need to be protected, and they also need to evolve intelligently. Claire Amos, our dear friend Claire Amos, asks if you think the protein and creatine push is part of the broader monetization of menopause. You mentioned menopause having a moment. She says it feels like it's quickly been captured by the market. It feels like what should be empowering is quickly becoming yet another thing for women to nail.
Yeah. I have to say, I do take creatine now. I've done a lot of research on creatine and I do take it. I don't take many supplements. I take creatine. So I have to just, this is not an ad for it or any of that, but it is one that I take. I think with
Notice a big
menopause,
difference?
I think it is. I think it is. And, I am an athlete and I exercise a lot, and I do think that it's making a difference for me. Having said that, like turmeric is the one that I see the most, and it's fascinating to me. It's now one of the top 3 causes of liver injury in the US is overconsumption of turmeric. Yeah. And so we see this kind of, it's natural. Anyone can spin up a supplements company. Mel Robbins has spun up a protein drink that she's bought a company by the looks of it. That's the way I see it. That was already selling a protein drink, and she's rebadged it. And this kind of, yeah, I think that there's a whole lot around menopause that has become yet another way for us to have body dysmorphia, yet another way for us to add a big list of things that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to keep our muscle mass. Well, we are. Like, we will be healthier if we keep our muscle mass, but that doesn't mean we all have to be ripped. There's this a whole lot of I love Claire because I love watching your skating videos, but it feels like instead of the joy, when I watch your videos, I feel joy, but I feel like there's like almost pressure on us to be athletes in our 60s now, to have the perfect diet, to have the perfect body shape. You add kind of turmeric and creatine and the GLP-1 drugs, and then all these people with their exercise videos, and not only do our teen girls have these like body dysmorphia thanks to social media, but I feel like, middle-aged women, we're now getting more body dysmorphia from what is being promoted at us. I guess I come back to Trini for a sec. She's a woman who very openly does a lot of stuff to her face, has a lot of procedures. She went on Facebook showing how to get a colonic. Like the pressure is ridiculous. So yeah, and I think the monetization of menopause and perimenopause is doing my head in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that turmeric stat, which obviously you saw from my face, had not been aware of. Just a reminder that poison is a function of dosage. That if you drink too much water, you can die from water poisoning, right? We see this as the answer is turmeric, the answer is creatine, and actually the answer is presence and balance and awakeness and all of those beautiful things.
I want to pick up on the water thing very quickly. Is
Yes.
that all those people with those ridiculously big like water things, they're washing the minerals out of their bodies. So no wonder they then have to take like mineral supplements to replace the minerals that were there. Like your body knows when it's thirsty and you need to drink. Like it's like we have this conspiracy to take away our body experience and to distrust what our body knows.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I know we're done.
Beautiful. Fantastic way to close. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Great questions. Thank you, Melissa, for an always thought-provoking session. Please do sing out if you want to bring Melissa into your organization. What a delight. And we're going to see you in 6 months for sure, because I'm not giving up on these sessions. They're too good. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Ka kite. Kia ora.